Why nobody lives in these 9 empty states from here to there. Let's find out. What are the states? Why does nobody live there?
The United States is enormous. In fact,
you could
it's
say
the
that
third
again.
largest country by both area and population.
Yeah. It's huge. Sorry, I'm 5 seconds into the video and I'm pausing, but it just sort of is what it is. I've driven from the Bay Area all the way to Minnesota, and I've driven from Richmond, Virginia down to Dallas, Texas. So I've done most of the country. I haven't done this part right here. It takes days and days and days. I think there's a meme where it's like the typical European vacation plan for the US. Morning arrival in New York, 1 hour drive to Miami by noon, 2 hour drive to Las Vegas, and then night return flight from Los Angeles. This is how people picture the US, but in reality, these are massive swaths of land the size of actual countries. But anyway, let's go ahead and hear this person out.
And yet, despite being home to 334 million residents, nearly half of the country remains completely uninhabited.
True.
With more people living in New York City than the following 9 states combined.
One thing that struck me when I went to Europe recently, and I took a big road trip, I drove like 1,400, 1,500 miles across Europe, down from Germany through Eastern Europe, down into Italy, across like down into France. One thing that was shocking to me is how developed the entire continent is. There's like no places where you don't go through at least small towns on these highways. But in America, you drive across the West, you can get into the middle of nowhere so quickly.
Number 9, Maine. Maine is so far north, the people living here might as well be Canadian.
Dog, Maine is in the middle of nowhere.
Surrounded by our friendly maple syrup-loving cousins. And the landscape is nearly identical too, with mystical pine forests, glacial lakes, rocky coast, and of course, moose.
Beautiful place, very empty, very remote, shockingly hard to get to. Incredibly far from like any population center other than, I guess, Boston, Massachusetts is probably the closest one. So it doesn't really make a ton of sense to live there unless you're in one of the industries that it supports, which are also few other than fishing, right? I can't think of a single other industry that Maine has other than fishing.
Beautiful state, mostly uninhabited with just 1.385 million residents, especially when compared to other East Coast states. It's simple. The climate. This map shows Maine's population density by area. As you can see, nearly every Mainer lives in the south or along the coast, where the farmland is more fertile and the winters are bearably cold. Winter in the rest of Maine is similar to winter in Game of Thrones. Brutal and never ending. As such, not much industry exists in the vast majority of the state, which is 89% untouched forest. And while
I guess
Portland
the industry
is a
thing.
hip and charming city with great restaurants at a decent economy, Maine is also the most rural state with only 38.7% of the population living in urban centers.
That's surprising.
So unless you're a trust fund baby who loves driving their snowmobile on Moosehead Lake for the 1300th time, the state just doesn't offer much for young people, who usually leave in their 20s and only think of coming back to retire. The Pine Tree State has the oldest median age at 44.8
Does it
years.
really now? That's not that surprising. I mean, old people love living in the woods for whatever reason. I mean, it's not surprising now that I know. It's surprising to hear that, though, if that makes sense. Really quickly, pardon the interruption. You know, here at the Quinchman channel, we're all about learning about the world. And if you didn't know that, now you do. So today, I want to introduce a new concept for you. We are going to be posting videos at least every other day, probably every single day on this channel going forward. And so what I want to introduce to you today is the daily trivia. Every day we're going to be having a daily trivia question that I ask you in the video. And then the following day I will be revealing the answer in the next day's video. And the first person to comment the correct answer gets the pinned comment on the video. So you're racing. Without further ado, the question for today is, what is the U.S. capital city at the highest elevation? Do not Google it. Don't be lame. Just try to think about it for a little bit. Use your brain, man. Use your brain and try to figure out the answer. Comment it down below with a message to make the people laugh, to make the people smile as well. And again, the answer will be revealed in the next upcoming video. So let's get back to it.
The West, full of mountains and glaciers that touch the sky,
Yeah.
Montana is a dream come true for any would-be cowboys.
It's a dream come true for billionaires is what Montana is, because they own like half of that state. And the government keeps making it easier and easier for them to scoop up more and more land. It's difficult to pinpoint the exact percentage, but Montana has more billionaires than all of its neighboring states. Isn't that insane? It's the least populated one out of all of them, but it has more billionaires than every single one of them. It's weird. It's a weird place, but it's beautiful. It makes sense that this one is not that populated because the topography is just not good. It's big, it's dry, it's mountainous, it's hard to navigate. It makes more sense that this is less populated than Maine.
It may come as a surprise to hear then that the state houses just 1.12 million residents despite covering 147,000 square miles. Yeah, Montana is larger than Japan, yet houses less than 1/100th its population.
Whoa, that's a
Why is
crazy
this big,
fact. BBS, big beautiful state.
Well, as I'm sure you'll be shocked to discover, most Americans don't want to be cowboys. Millennials and Gen Z want to live near bustling metropolises with good-paying jobs and city amenities.
Don't tell me what I want and don't want. You don't know. While it may be true that I do want to live in a bustling metropolis with good-paying jobs and amenities, that's not because I'm a millennial. It's because those things are nice. I also like fly fishing.
Some towns are so remote that the nearest Walmart is a 2 to 3 hour drive away.
That's the most important thing for me when I'm thinking about where to live, is how far away is the nearest Walmart. I need those low prices.
For inflated home prices and horrifically cold and windy weather. The negative 70 degrees Fahrenheit recorded at Rogers Pass was actually the lowest recorded U.S. temperature outside of Alaska. And parts of the state see snow 12 months out of the year.
That's awesome.
So sure, that summer trip to Glacier sounds splendid. But unless you're looking to do a real-life survival challenge on expert difficulty, year-round living in Montana is too unforgiving for most.
I think that this guy doesn't like cold weather because I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's the coldest city in the United States of America on average, and plenty of people live here. It's a huge city. The Twin Cities are gigantic. Chicago's cold. People live there. I don't think that the cold is as big of a deterrent for people living somewhere as you might think.
Number 7, Rhode Island. The only thing Rhode Island and Montana have in common is their population. Because while Montana is massive, landlocked, and full of mountains and wide open spaces, Rhode Island is tiny, coastal, and flat. In fact, it's by far the smallest state at just 1,034 square miles. So although less than 1.1 million people call the ocean state home, that's mostly just due to it being so darn small that there isn't any room for more residents.
Why is Rhode Island called Rhode Island when it's actually not an island? Let's find out. Rhode Island's name comes from a combination of two sources. Giovanni de Verrazzano, comparison of the island to the Greek island of Rhodes, and the Dutch explorer Adrian Block's name, Root Elandet, Red Island, for the island's reddish soil. Oh, it does have islands. There's a bunch of islands in this state. I thought it was one big landmass. You learn something new every day.
Number 6, Delaware.
All right, well, I know why people don't live in Delaware. This place is trash. Across the board, garbage state, garbage land. It's a big swamp in the middle of nowhere somehow, even though being super close to DC, but it's still just like completely out of the way. It's just not even close to anything major. The people are smelly. It just has a weird vibe in general. I can't blame anyone for not wanting to live in Delaware, okay?
Size of Rhode Island. But at just 1,948 square miles, around the same size as the city of Anchorage, it's still exceptionally small. And while Rhode Island's population is boosted by the mid-sized city of Providence, Delaware has Wilmington with an astonishing 70,000 residents. But why does Delaware have no large metropolis?
Nobody wants to live here.
Especially since it houses over 2 million corporations. Well, Wilmington could have been a prime candidate, but Philadelphia, just 30 miles upstream, stopped any notion of that since its location was less prone to storms and closer to the other major cities at the time.
Also, Delaware had to become a corporate haven because they have literally nothing else going for them.
Not to mention, it was the birthplace of the country. country. And the rest of Delaware is out of the way of the I-95 corridor and most historical trading routes. So it's largely beach tourism-based economy, never required any large cities.
It's
Plus
just
the loophole in Delaware that allows companies to pay no
way.
state income tax, make sure those companies only conduct business in other states, meaning they don't actually create jobs in Delaware. But hey, retirees don't need jobs and love beaches, so they're moving in droves. The population of 1.02 million actually grew by 1.4% over the past year.
That's crazy. Delaware is becoming crappy Florida. It's just becoming the worst version of Florida with less going on and worse beaches.
Number 5. South Dakota.
Why would anyone want to live in this state? I have no idea. I've driven through this state many, many times, and I've tried to puzzle it out, but I have no clue what draws people to move to this place whatsoever. Maybe fracking? Do they have fracking there? But other than that, it's literally devoid of anything. It's completely devoid of anything that you would find interesting. Like a human being would find nothing about this state interesting whatsoever.
Home to Wall Drug, one of America's most famous cultural landmarks. Wait, Wall Drug? What? No, I meant Mount Rushmore. Sorry, after passing literally 200 billboards talking about the place,
yeah, Wall Drug
is most certainly not worth the hype, but impossible to forget. Damn marketing schemes. The fact that Wall Drug is the most exciting thing for hundreds of miles, however, says a lot about South Dakota.
Dog,
it's
I'm
vast,
saying.
far from everything, and virtually empty. Not to mention, really cold.
It is really cold.
And those are the exact reasons why it's the 5th smallest state by both population and population density.
So you have the cold, the extreme cold of Montana or Maine, but without the natural beauty or the outdoor activities, right? So what you get is a big, cold, flat plain that nobody wants to go to. With no amenities! It's got nothing! I hate this place!
To put that into perspective, South Dakota's surface area is 17% larger than Florida's, yet it has fewer residents than the city of Jacksonville. Historically, most of the Great Plains states had no need for major city centers as their populations were mostly rural and economies mainly agricultural and mining based. But driving through the fields of South Dakota feels so much lonelier than in Nebraska or Kansas.
Yep.
There's just less everything.
There's
houses,
just nothing.
farms, truck stops,
it's terrible.
and semblances of civilization. Number 4. North Dakota.
The only thing worse than South Dakota. I've never actually been to North Dakota, but I can imagine what it is, and it is probably terrible. I feel pretty confident going on the record and posting this publicly to the internet saying North Dakota probably sucks.
Problem plaguing South Dakota. Now multiply them by 10, add some oil, and boom, you've got North Dakota.
At least you got fracking, though.
In addition to hot and humid summers and terrible flash flooding during the spring, it's no wonder less than 780,000 residents live in this lonely state.
Yeah, he didn't talk at all about states where it's really hot and sucks to be, like Florida, swampy, terrible. The thing about these Midwestern states, Minnesota included, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Illinois, all these, Great Plains states, is that you get bitter cold winters, but somehow it's still 90 plus degrees in the summer. It's in a lot of ways the worst of both worlds in the climate, but the spring and fall, ooh, baby, unbelievable. You would not believe how awesome it is.
Especially since South Dakota is prettier with better weather and tax laws and a more diversified economy. North Dakota is also incredibly isolated from major urban centers and thus supplies and services. Historically, settlers who traveled west didn't stop until they reached the coast, where the land was more arable, resources more rich, and the climate less harsh. So North Dakota never had large enough permanent population numbers or industry to warrant big cities.
Imagine going on the Oregon Trail, uprooting your entire family, put all your belongings into a covered wagon, you risk dysentery, you fjord the river, your wagon wheel doesn't fall off, and then you just hit North Dakota and you're like, we made it, baby! Have arrived! Some people are making it all the way to California. The people on the Oregon Trail are making it to California, they're making it to Oregon, they're making it to Washington, and you're just stopping in North Dakota, you're like, no, it's pretty good here. And you have no idea what you're missing.
And though there was plenty of cheap farmland, many farmers who could have settled in North Dakota in the late 18 and early 1900s instead chose to settle further north in the Canadian prairies. This is due to the Aspen Parkland Belt, a unique ecosystem in the plains which has an abundance of rain, trees, and fertile soil. Heck, just the city of Winnipeg, 70 miles north of North Dakota, has a population greater than the entire state.
Wait, actually, Winnipeg has more people than the entire state of North Dakota? That's unbelievable. What a crazy fact. That was worth watching this whole video, that one fact.
Number 3. Alaska. Alaska is the big daddy of states. No, literally, it's so big that if you cut it in half, either part would still be by far the largest state. Yet despite spanning 665,000 square miles, most of it is inaccessible and isolated. Not only is it a 40-hour, 2,200-mile drive through remote Canada to the nearest non-Alaskan U.S. city, even towns within Alaska are hundreds of miles apart, and many of the largest communities aren't accessible by car. In fact, there are barely 16,000 miles of road in the entire state.
Cool towns you can only get to by boat or aircraft? That's unreal. Also, Alaska is the only state that I will agree about the cold making it unlivable. I think you would have a valid point with the winters in Alaska because there's literally days where the sun doesn't come out, right? There's full days of nighttime, effectively. And in the summer, almost just as bad, you have full days of daytime where the sun never sets. That's unreal. That sucks. Both of those suck.
5,000 miles less than Connecticut, and you could fit 120 Connecticut's in Alaska. Yeah, they ain't kidding when they call it the last frontier, a land where grizzlies, moose, and wolves walk around town, and where vast untamed forests, coasts, mountains, and tundra combine to make up an area larger than Mongolia. But for all its beauty, the wilderness is also a harsh mistress. A mere 733,000 residents are willing to brave the desolate, long, dark, and frigid winters where -40 Fahrenheit and less than 4 hours of daylight are common. And while Mongolia is both the emptiest and least densely populated country in the world, with just 5.2 people per square mile, Alaska's population density is 1/4 of that. And if you exclude Anchorage, the state's only real city, the population density becomes a paltry 0.5 people per square mile. It's no wonder Alaska has the highest violent crime rate and number of serial killers per capita.
What? Where did that come from?
Oh, dang. I love the outdoors, but you couldn't pay me to live there. Well, you actually do get paid to live here, but you still probably couldn't afford it since everything is more expensive and the economy isn't great.
How could there be a less densely populated state than Alaska? Is it Wyoming? How are there two? That's pretty surprising. Looking that fact up about Mongolia is 603,900,000 square miles, and Alaska is 665,400 square miles. That's unbelievable that it's bigger than Mongolia. I thought Mongolia was gigantic, but apparently Alaska is also gigantic as well.
Number 2. Vermont. Besides being known as the home of Bernie Sanders, when most people think of Vermont, they probably picture cozy farmhouses tucked away amongst autumnal colors, with their inhabitants waking up to a blissful chorus of chirping birds and rushing water before lathering some Vermont maple syrup on a hearty breakfast. And they wouldn't be wrong. Despite being the 6th smallest state by area, Vermont is a rural haven in every sense of the word, with just 38.9% of residents living in urban centers. This, in addition to Vermont's mountainous and forested terrain not being ideal for building large cities, is the main reason it's so sparsely populated, with just 647,000 residents. Wait a minute, I just looked at the map. Vermont borders Canada, and so do over half the states on this list.
True.
Is the real reason Americans don't live in them because they secretly just don't like Canadians. You know, you might be onto something, but I think the more logical explanation is that Canada is cold, so states that border Canada are also cold, and most people don't like the cold. With that said, Vermont's beautiful scenery, great affordability compared to the rest of New England, and thriving job market in Burlington has turned it into the most moved to state since 2020.
Actually, the most addicted to opioids as well. So, you know, if you're into that sort of thing, head up to Vermont.
And 3 honorable mentions that have larger populations than Maine, but are still virtually empty apart from 1 or 2 major
Utah.
cities, are New Mexico, which houses 2.1 million residents.
Yep.
But since it's also the 5th largest state by total
Beautiful,
area,
though.
its population density of just 17.2 people per square mile is the 6th lowest of any state. And if you exclude the Albuquerque metro area, where nearly half of all New Mexicans live, the rest of the state is emptier than North Dakota. Idaho, whose population of 1.94 million did increase by over 100,000 residents in just the last 2 years.
The big COVID spot. Boise, Idaho, big place that people moved during COVID. Real estate shot up there. Same with Bozeman, Montana, I think. Both of those states saw huge influxes of people during COVID times and post-COVID.
The state is still very sparsely populated, with the most untouched national forest in the nation.
I did not know that.
22.3 people per square mile. And Nevada, which has a fairly
Utah's
large
not on here?
population at 3.18 million. But did you know that 83% of the state is completely uninhabited? And 93% of the state looks like this? Plus,
It's
if you took
awful.
out Las Vegas, whose metro area houses 3/4 of all Nevadans, the population density would be just 7.7 people per square mile.
When I was a kid, I drove from Las Vegas to Reno, Nevada. And also as an adult, I've driven through Nevada a few times across from Reno to Utah. So I've driven across a lot of that state. I've been through most of it. Whew, that place is stinky. That's one of the worst places that I've been in my entire life. I agree. Outside of the Las Vegas area, there's literally nothing going on there. It's the type of place, it looks like the wasteland from Fallout, right? Like it looks like you emerge from the vault and you come out and you're in Nevada. Literally, New Vegas is set in Nevada, right? The game Fallout New Vegas is set in Nevada because it's such a perfect desert, post-apocalyptic wasteland to put that kind of game in. It's unreal. It's terrible. Oh, that place is terrible. It's the type of place where every house has a broken down school bus in front of it. And by every house, I mean the 5 houses that you see within 2 hours of driving.
Number 1, Wyoming. Unless you've been living under a rock or in Rock Springs, you've probably heard that nearly no one lives in Wyoming.
Yep.
But nearly no one isn't no one, because while Wyoming is the 2nd least densely populated state with just 5.9
Hella billionaires,
people per
dude.
square mile, 581,381 hardworking, friendly Wyomingites still endure the windiest weather in America. And let me tell you, as someone who has visited the state many times, living in Wyoming's windy, remote, rugged, dry,
it would be awful.
windy, elevated landscape isn't for the faint of heart, especially since there's no real cities and very few jobs and services. In fact, if it weren't for the government, Wyoming might not even have an economy at all. 25% of the workforce is employed by the state or feds.
There is many sections of Highway 80 in Wyoming where they have to shut the road down in the wintertime because of snow drifts. Snow drifts are when it snows. It's not because of the amount of snow that comes down. It's because of the amount of snow that gets blown onto the road. These winter storms have like 80-mile-an-hour winds that blow tons and tons, piles and piles of snow onto you, and they'll like flip over semi-trucks and stuff. It is actually low-key treacherous to drive through that state. But anyway, that was pretty interesting. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Till next time, bye!